Você tem noção de que um chimpanzé, na busca pelo poder, chega a levantar filhote e tentar conquistar o voto feminino para ser o líder do seu bando? Esse exemplo de comportamento e vários outros que parecem muito mais humanos do que a gente está acostumado a pensar, eu descobri na obra do primatologista Frans de Waal, que, entre outros livros, escreveu recentemente o Somos Inteligentes o Bastante para Saber o Quão Inteligentes São os Animais? O Frans de Waal tem toda uma obra fantástica, a maneira que ele tem de entender o comportamento dos animais é muito legal e coloca a gente muito mais num gradiente de comportamentos, em que a gente tem o comportamento humano ali no meio, do que como uma classe completamente distinta de seres dotados de uma inteligência que nenhum outro animal tem. Eu recomendo demais a obra dele e foi um dos primeiros nomes que eu pensei em entrevistar para o Hiperconectado, que é o meu programa na TV Cultura. O programa vai ao ar aos sábados à noite e às quartas-feiras também é reprisado à noite, e um dos primeiros nomes que eu pude entrevistar foi o Frans de Waal. No Hiperconectado, a gente conta essa história de um chimpanzé batalhando para ser o líder do seu bando, e tem um plot twist fantástico nessa história, e o que tem de apoio e politicagem por trás de um bom líder ou um líder fraco, que vai depender de quem ajudou ele a subir no poder. Mas a entrevista toda com ele ficou muito boa, tem muita coisa legal e tem histórias interessantes, inclusive para um Brasil em ano de eleição. Então, para conversar mais sobre inteligência animal, para ver o que a gente pode aprender com os chimpanzés e pensar até nas eleições desse ano aqui, eu vou trazer para vocês a entrevista toda com o Frans de Waal, o papo todo por aqui. Espero que vocês gostem e espero trazer mais conversas que a gente tem para o Hiperconectado, para derivar outras coisas por aqui e conversar mais sobre coisas fantásticas que a gente tem para descobrir, com quem inclusive fez a pesquisa. Espero que curtam, devo trazer mais conteúdo por aqui, deixem nos comentários o que vocês acharam da conversa e vamos lá.
So, nice to meet you, Professor. It's a real pleasure to be able to talk to you. So we're talking about politics being done by other animals, something that we usually attribute as a human culture or a human feature only, one of those human exceptions that we always like to find and pinch it and take it out of context to say that only we have. But your first book is Chimpanzee Politics, where you tell to people that chimpanzees do politics also. And I feel it's a rupture with the usual descriptions that we have of animal behavior. So usually people say something from the distance like, he did this, he took that, or he did something to his partners, but not in a social context, not with this kind of description. And you brought this richness of animal experience that we could see how they interact in environments such as the zoo that you worked with. So how was the reception of your work by giving this different proposition that their behavior can be closer to ours?
Well, it was actually a very good reception. Chimpanzee Politics it's a book that's now 40 years old. It's considered a classic because it was the first book that brought Machiavelli into primate behavior and talked about politics. But I think my colleagues, especially the ones who work with primates, they know the social hierarchy is not decided strictly by who is the strongest. So it's decided by group processes, which means that sometimes an individual who is smaller can be the alpha male because he has support from others, and he needs to keep that support from the others, and otherwise he loses that position. So it's much more complex, and I think most primatologists, they agreed with that. And outside primatology, there are of course people who have a very simplistic view of animals, and who think that animals are sort of machines. Those people were probably not happy with my book, but I tend to ignore these people because I think the idea that animals are machines is a very old idea, but most scientists really don't believe that anymore.
You describe candidates, political candidates in the troops that get their babies or get babies from the females to get their support, that do this political action, actually. What other parallels would you see between our politics or the way we do group interaction and we gather support from peers and the chimpanzees?
Yeah, so chimpanzee males, when they are trying to become the dominant male, they have a sort of campaign. They try to provoke the leader and see how does he get nervous. They want to see if he gets nervous. And if he gets nervous, that is a sign for them to go further. They try to get support from females, which they do by tickling their babies and holding their babies, which for the females, that's a sign whether that's a good male, a male who can handle babies. And actually, human politicians do the same thing. Of course, human politicians, they hold their babies in the air, which is not something that babies necessarily like, but it's because it's a display. It's to show that you can do that without dropping the baby. And I found it very interesting. In American politics, we had a female candidate, which was Hillary Clinton. And Hillary Clinton never did that. If she would pick up a baby, she would hold it supportive, you know? She wouldn't do displays like the males did. And I think it's because we all understand that a woman knows how to handle babies, and for a man, it's not sure. So yeah, they have these strategies, and the male chimpanzees, they follow these strategies because they need female support. And they have other things that they do. They groom certain buddies, they share food with certain others that they need support. And so they bribe, in a way, they bribe them by being very generous with them. And so they have all these strategies to get support, because on their own, a male on his own, he's not going to be the dominant male. He needs others to help him. And that's why there is competition about relationships. Like if you are my friend, I'm going to groom you, but I will prevent you having contact with my enemies. I will keep you away from my rivals, because I want you for me. And so there's a lot of that kind of politics going on.
Yeah, I feel that my toddler does the same, tries to keep us busy with him so that he won't have any brothers to share food or anything with them. But would you say so you're telling me they do displays, they gather peers, they promote debates or try to check for the reactions of their enemies. So this all sounds very familiar with what we see in politics, and especially the baby displays, something that, I see no use for it in our politicians doing it. So we usually think of politics as something being done for an end. Like I want to be a mayor, I want to be a senator, I want to be a president, to be able to do this, to be able to do that, because this is an important cause. We attribute this function for our impulses of political interaction. But would you say it's the reverse, that we have these political impulses, we do these kind of things to have social support, and as humans, we try to justify it by seeking for a meaning behind it? Yeah.
Human politicians are not honest. They lie a lot, and they present themselves as that they want to help you. They want to fix the education system. They want to fix the economy. They want to make the country better. They don't tell that they want power, but of course they want power. Otherwise, why would they do all this effort? They want power, and in that sense, chimpanzee males are much more honest, because they don't talk about what they want to do for everybody. They just try to get the power and try to get the top position. And sometimes when they reach the top position, they are good for everybody, which are the good leaders. And sometimes they are horrible. They are nasty and they are aggressive. And it's for the group then to predict. The group has to predict what kind of leader are we going to get. And for humans, let's say for you in your elections in Brazil, it is very tough to know, because these candidates, they make an enormous amount of promises, and you're not sure that they're going to keep these promises. You're not sure that maybe they have a completely different agenda that you don't know about, which may be money or maybe power. So with human politicians, it's always difficult because they are not honest generally.
Yeah, so this raises a question for me. As an anthropologist, when do you have more work to do? When you're looking at the chimpanzees interacting in the zoo, or when you're looking at a political campaign?
Yeah, I think I am very happy that I work with animals who cannot talk, because I don't trust talk. So if I listen to political debates in the United States on television, I usually turn the sound off. I just want to see the body language, the facial expressions, the body language. Very interesting. So, for example, when we had here the debates between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, was very lots of body language going on, which was fascinating, much more fascinating in my opinion than what they were saying. Because, as I say, I don't trust what people are saying usually, but I do trust their body language.
Do you have an example of the body language of something they would do that you would recognize?
Well, for example, in the debates between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, Trump tried to intimidate. He tried to walk right behind her, and he's much bigger than her. And so this was an intimidation tactic. And I think the interesting part was that between men, intimidation is very common. Two men, they will try to look big and lower their voice, and that's all very common. Between a man and a woman, it doesn't work the same way, because women don't have that kind of body language, and they don't respond very well to that kind of body language. And so you get a very different dynamic between a male candidate and a female candidate than you get between two men.
And, well, we are in an election year here in Brazil. We'll have a very long time to see the debates, find what our politicians are promising, what they're doing. Would you have any tips for us on what to recognize, or what does a good leader in the chimpanzee world make that makes it great, or makes him great?
Yeah, so the alpha males in chimpanzees, I usually divide them in two categories. One is what I call bullies. They try to intimidate, they try to be the boss. They will make sure that no one objects to them, no one disagrees with them. They can be very aggressive sometimes, and they are arrogant. Usually they're arrogant. And then the other group is what I call the populists. These are males who try to do something for the community. They try to keep the peace. They try to keep the group together. They are generous. They share food with others. They are empathic. They have empathy for others. Some of these characteristics you can also see in female leaders. So for some of the female leaders we have in the world, like let's say Angela Merkel in Germany, she was an empathic leader. So sometimes females have these capacities, but males can have these capacities too. And there are sometimes in chimpanzees, there are males who are excellent leaders and everyone loves them. But the bullies are not loved very much. And with the bullies in the wild, we also have sometimes that kind of males who terrorize everybody. They often end poorly, in the sense that when the moment comes that the group feels that they can support somebody else, they're going to support another male, and they try to get rid of this male. And they may even kill a male like that. So the bullies don't end very well, usually. Whereas a leader who's loved, and I've seen many of them in chimpanzee males, good leaders, when their time comes to lose their position, they just take a few steps back. They become number 2 or number 3 or number 4, and they still keep playing politics usually, but they are accepted in the group and there's no problem because they are loved by the group.
So would you say that bullies make good campaigns but terrible leaders of the group?
Bullies are terrible leaders, and I think we have quite a few in the world today. We have quite a few autocratic leaders who use violence to stay on top, or corruption to stay on top. But I think they are not very loved by the group, and so they will be kicked out at some point.
Yeah, I hope so. And so we're talking mostly about chimpanzees that have very big social groups that interact with many others that have this kind of hierarchy. Would you have an example or examples of other animals that also may have this kind of hierarchy and political interaction among their groups?
Well, we have two close relatives as humans. One is chimpanzees and the other one is bonobos. They're actually exactly equally close to us in terms of DNA. So all other species are more distant, like gorillas or orangutans or monkeys, like your capuchin monkeys in Brazil. All the other primates are more distant from us. So chimpanzees and bonobos are the closest. And bonobos are very different. Bonobos are equally close, but they are female dominated. So the most dominant individual is usually a female. And she has a clique of other females around her. She is supported by, they are not sisters, they are unrelated females, but they form a clique of maybe 4 or 5 females, and they run the group. As a result of the female leadership, they are less territorial. So bonobos, they sometimes mingle between groups. Chimpanzees are very territorial, they kill each other between groups. Bonobos, they sometimes mingle and they groom each other and they have sex with each other. It's a very peaceful species. So it's very interesting that we have 2 close relatives. One is male dominated, the other one is female dominated. And you always have to think about that. If people say females cannot be leaders because look at the primates, I always think, well, look at the 2 close relatives and you see female leaders. Also in the chimpanzee community, which is male dominated, there is usually an alpha female, and the alpha female is a very important figure. The alpha female, for example, often decides who will be the alpha male. So even in chimpanzees, the alpha female is a very important figure, and in bonobos, the alpha female is the top of everything. So when people say the females cannot be leaders, I don't think the primates support that view necessarily, you know?
Yeah, it's mostly trying to justify something that we do, rather than having other natural examples and applying them to us.
Yeah, at the moment we have quite a few good female leaders in the world. Angela Merkel was, of course, the most prominent example of it. And everyone was very happy with her leadership. So that argument is not really very valid, I think.
Yeah, and I think this brings something else that is important. We usually talk about politics, or at least animal interaction, as something that is violent, that is primal, that has death, that has the conquer of power. And we usually look at these negative or more violent aspects of the interaction. But for them to do politics, they have to cooperate. They have to respect others. They have to have empathy for others, right? To put themselves on their shoes also. So what are we missing when we only talk about the negative side of the political interaction that they may have?
Yeah, there's a long tradition. Usually people call it the struggle for life. You know, there's a long tradition to present the natural world as a place of competition and aggression. And if you say animals are aggressive, no one disagrees with you. But if you say animals love each other, which they also do, people object, and they say you shouldn't use that kind of words for animals. Animals cannot love each other. But you know, animals have, just like humans, we have 2 sides. We can be very nice and very altruistic, and we can be very horrible and aggressive. And I think in most animals you see these 2 sides. And empathy is actually a very interesting trait for high-ranking individuals. So empathy is that you are affected by the emotions of somebody else and that you adopt these emotions or you react to these emotions. It is usually more a female characteristic than a male. It's more strongly developed in females than in males. But it occurs in both sexes, of course. And high-ranking males, sometimes they can be highly empathic. They can be generous in sharing food, and if someone is distressed, if someone has been attacked, they go over there and they protect the individual or they help the individual. And so empathy is a very important part of leadership. So if you look at the world, the human world, if there is an earthquake, for example, the Pope will go there or the president will go there. If there is a tsunami, the high-ranking individuals, they go there. So they have to show empathy. If they don't show empathy, we don't like that kind of leaders. We want our leaders to do that. And I think the same is true for many primate leaders, is that they are not purely aggressive. People always think that. They think that they terrorize everyone, but that's not always the case.
Yeah, I would say that the support that they may have, at least by your descriptions in your books, it's usually most on the empathic sides than on the violent sides.
Yeah.
And would you put us in a different being or in a different group in terms of either violence or empathy? Or would you say there is a more continuum, a gradient of behavior that we usually don't see as much, but by looking at other animals, we can see that they do the same kinds of things that we do. It's in another degree, but not a different kind of behavior.
Yeah, I think in some species like chimpanzees and bonobos, you see that kind of leadership where empathy is important and keeping the peace is important. There are other animals where this is not necessarily the case. So the reason we don't speak of politics in all animals is that there are animals like, let's say, chickens. The pecking order comes from chickens because in some species like the chickens, it is the individual who's dominant. There is no politics. There is no coalitions going on. So the biggest and meanest and most aggressive chicken will be on the top. But since that is not the case in let's say, chimpanzees and in humans, you get a very different social system where other qualities come into play. And so it's not always the strongest and the most aggressive who gets to the top.
Nice, perfect. And we began by looking at Jeroen and his support of a weaker leader so that he could keep his privileges. And it really surprises me on the finesse of their thinking and their dynamics in a group. Would you have other political interactions among chimpanzees that you recall often or that you found very interesting?
Well, what Jeroen did in his is that the older males, when they are over the hill and they cannot be alpha male anymore, they still want to make a comeback, and that's what happened with Jeroen. Is that he still wanted to be powerful, and so they help a young male to become the leader, and then they control the young male. The young male is very dependent on them. Because the young male cannot be alpha male without them. And this kind of behind the scenes older males is of course very common in human politics also. In the US, in Europe, I see that all the time. The older men who are present in meetings and so on, they are not the president and they are not the leader, but they have an enormous amount of influence. And so that's a game that many older males play. They play off the younger males. The younger males are very competitive. So they're always busy with their competition, and the older males sort of try to be in the middle, which gives them an enormous amount of power. So it's a very interesting game. Another strategy that is, I think, of interest is what in humans we call it divide and rule. Is you need to divide others. So if you're an alpha male, a chimpanzee, for example, you try to interfere when other males get together. So let's say two other males, they start to groom each other, they sit together. You interfere with that because you don't want them to become close friends, because they need to be friends with you, not with each other. And so males play this game of divide and rule all the time, sometimes very intensely, because their position depends on keeping others from forming friendships. It's a very common thing. It's a very common behavior in businesses also. I sometimes speak for business leaders, and they say also that the managers of the high-ranking individuals, they try to prevent the ones who work for them to get too close to each other. They are allowed to be friends, but only in the presence of this high-ranking person. Yeah.
And how often do politicians or company leaders seek your advices and your knowledge about behavior in general?
Oh yeah, they're very interested in. They do seek it. So they do seek. I usually, what I tell them is very basic strategies, not usually the stuff that they hear from their consultants who talk about visions and have point by point decision making and stuff like that. Because the stuff that the chimpanzees do is much more basic, is very power driven, and has an aspect of cooperation. And the business is, of course, very interested in how you keep cooperation going despite all the competition that is also going at the same time. It's that combination of competition and cooperation that is really interesting. It's very much developed in male chimpanzees and also human males. Human males, they can be friends and rivals at the same time. They get along most of the time, but they are also rivalries between them. And I think for females, and this is also true for female chimpanzees, there is more of a difference. It's like you are either a friend or you are a rival, but you're not both at the same time. So the dynamic among men and among male chimpanzees is a bit different, I think.
Yeah, and I think that if people just join in at this point of conversation and don't know that we were talking about chimpanzees a while ago, they probably have followed the conversation just thinking we are talking about humans and politicians and that's it, because it's so close.
Yeah, so for example, I have done a lot of studies on what I call reconciliation. So after a fight, chimpanzees come together and they kiss and embrace, and then they groom, and then they forget the conflict. And reconciliation is very important to keep relationships going. Also in humans, of course, very important. Now, in chimpanzees, the males are much better at reconciling than the females. So the males have a lot of competition and sometimes aggression, but they also reconcile much more easily than the females. I think the female strategy is to avoid competition, to suppress disagreements, because they have trouble reconciling afterwards, which makes it for them, if there is a conflict, it makes it much more serious for them. So, and that in humans, of course, you can also see is that men can have a big fight in a meeting, and then 5 minutes later they're laughing together. So they alternate very easily between these things, much more easily than I think women do.
I think we've gone through everything here, and much more interesting points than I originally had thought. I appreciate. Thank you very much for your time, for your knowledge, for the books you've written. I think they have many drops of important points about us, about other animals, and how we should be more empathetic to humans and to other animals to understand how much complex behavior we can have. And I think it goes both ways. We could respect the animals more and treat them differently, more human-like, and we could think about what we do more based on what other animals do, and recognize that sometimes we have the behavior and then we justify it, not necessarily do this behavior because of an emotion or a need or some higher wants that we have. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You're welcome.